Very important chapter and the easiest chapter is the inverse trigonometric function. You might have been studied your first PUC trigonometry. We are going to study the application of integrals. So for integrals, we will get 22 marks, very important. So you are going to answer for all the 10 questions. That means there is no choice in 40. Hello dear students, welcome to this session of 2nd PUC Mathematics Introduction class. I am Mr. Niranjan, Faculty, Department of Mathematics, Vidhyaashram PU College, the Temple of Excellence. Now today in this session I am going to discuss in detail regarding the syllabus as well as the question paper pattern and the weightage for all the chapters in 2nd PUC Mathematics. Now, let me discuss regarding what are the topics I am going to cover today is regarding the textbook, the reference textbooks. So, there are two parts, part 1 and part 2. In that, I am going to discuss regarding the syllabus as well as the weightage in part 1 and part 2. And the question paper pattern as well as the blueprint for that question paper. Now, let me know regarding the reference textbooks for the references. So, the prescribed textbooks are from NCERT part 1 and part 2, NCERT Mathematics part 1, NCERT Mathematics part 2 and exemplar problem as well as the books for the references, and that is Vidhyaashram study material. So, here see, this is the NCERT prescribed textbook part 1 and part 2, part 1 mathematics, part 2 mathematics book, and the exemplar problem from the prescribed board, that is NCERT, and the very important is Vidhyaashram study material for the reference. So, these are the references books, that is part 1, part 2 textbook from NCERT, that is volume 1, volume 2, and the exemplar problem from NCERT board as well as the Vidhyaashram study materials. These are the reference books which we are going to study. Now, in part 1, let me discuss in detail what are the chapters we are going to study in part 1, that is in volume 1, and the total number of teaching hours and the total number of marks that fetches in part 1 for each chapters. In part 1, the first chapter you are going to study is the relations and function. You might have been studied this relations and function in your first PUC itself. So, the same concept with a little bit extension of finding the different types of functions and the different types of relations, as well as finding the inverse of a function, that is invertible function, we are going to study in 2nd PUC relations and functions. So, the total number of hours for this chapter is 11 hours, and this chapter will fetch us around 11 marks. So, the weightage for this chapter is 11 marks. And the next very important chapter and the easiest chapter is the inverse trigonometric function. You might have been studied your first PUC trigonometry. So, the extension of the trigonometry for inverse function. So, we are going to study in 2nd PUC inverse trigonometric function, the same concept for inverse function. So, the marks you are going to get from this chapter is 8 marks, and the total number of teaching hours is also 8 hours. Now, let us come to the very easiest chapter, that is the matrices. So, here the maximum marks we are going to get from matrices is 9 marks, and the total number of teaching hours is 8 hours. Now, again the relation between next chapter is the relation for the next chapter is the determinants. So, there is a link between matrices and determinants. So, once if you know the concept of matrices, then you can easily solve the problems in determinants. So, the maximum marks for the determinant is 12, and the total number of hours we are going to take for this chapter is 13 hours. So, totally that matrices and determinants, this will fetch us around 21 marks, and very easiest chapters, matrices and determinants. Now, the next one is the continuity and the differentiability. So, you might have been studied the limits, continuity as well as the differentiation, the same concept we are going to study in 2nd PUC, and whereas in differentiability you might have been studied regarding the differentiation. So, here you are going to study different types of differentiations of a functions, like function of a function, that is chain rule, then parametric differentiations, implicit differentiations, logarithmic differentiations, as well as the second derivatives we are going to study in this differentiability. And this is very important chapter, and this will fetch us around 22 marks, and the number of teaching hours for this is 19 hours. And next, the last chapter in part 1 is the application of derivatives. In application of derivatives, we are going to study regarding the rate measure, then maxima and minima, and increasing and decreasing function, finding the equation of tangent and normal for a given curve, as well as finding the approximate values using differentials. So these are the things which we are going to study in application of derivatives, and that will also carries around 10 marks, and the number of hours we are going to use for this chapter is 11 hours. So totally, so the total marks allotted for part 1 is 70 marks, and the number of teaching hours is also 70. So in part 1 you will get 70 marks. All these chapters are very easiest chapter. Now the first chapter is relations and functions, second one is the inverse trigonometry function, third one is the matrices, fourth one is determinants, and the fifth one is continuity and differentiability. Whereas the last chapter in part 1 is application of derivative. Totally we are going to study 6 chapters, and from these 6 chapters we are going to get 70 marks. Okay, this is for the part A is concerned. Now let us come to part B, second part, volume 2. In part 2 there are 7 chapters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chapters. The first chapter is the integral calculus, integrals. So here we are going to study different types of integrations, that is indefinite integrals as well as the definite integrals. Then we are going to study the application of integrals. So for integrals we will get 22 marks, very important, and the maximum marks we are going to get from integrals, and for that the maximum number of classes we are going to take is 21 hours, and the maximum marks is 22. Now whereas the next concept is the application of integrals, here finding the areas of a curve. For this the maximum mark is 8 marks. 8 marks is the total marks allotted, and the number of hours which we are going to use is 8 hours. So from integral calculus you will get 30 marks. This is very important chapter, integrals as well as the application of integrals. Now whereas the next one is the combination of these differentiations, integrations, is the differential equation. So that will carry around 10 marks, and the number of teaching hours for this is 9 hours. And the next very important and easiest chapter is the vector algebra. You might have been studied in your first PUC physics classes for addition of vectors, subtraction, multiplications, that is scalar multiplication and vector multiplication. Same concept we are going to study in this vector algebra, along with finding the angle of intersection, the projection, as well as the scalar triple product of the vectors. That's what we are going to study in vector algebra, and this is very easiest chapter, and you will get around 11 marks from this chapter, and the number of teaching hours for this is 11. Now next is the 3D geometry, that is 3-dimensional geometry. You might have been studied in first PUC. So where you are going to study finding the distance between 2 points and section formulas. Now whereas in this analytical, that is 3-dimensional geometry, we are going to study regarding the different equations of a line as well as the different forms of a plane, both in vector form as well as in the Cartesian form, and the problems based on that we are going to study in the 3-dimensional geometry. And the maximum marks for this is also 11 marks, and the number of hours which we are going to use for this is 12 hours. Okay. Now the next very important and easiest chapter is the linear programming, LPP. So you might have been studied in first PUC linear inequalities. The same concept we are going to study in linear programming problem to find the maximum and minimum value of a given objective function. So using the graph, we are going to solve to find the maximum and minimum value of a function. That concept which you are going to study in linear programming problem, that is nothing but the extension of your linear inequalities of first PUC. So here you will get one 6 marks essay type question, and the total marks is 7 marks, and then the number of hours we are going to utilize for this is 7. And the last and important chapter is the probability in part 2. In probability, you might have been studied the basic definitions of probability and solving the problems of probability using multiplicative theorem. So here also in second PUC we are going to study regarding the different theorems like Bayes theorem as well as the Bernoulli's theorem, Bernoulli's distribution, to find the probability for a given problem. So these will carries around 11 marks, and the total number of hours is 12 hours. So these are the very important chapter that we are going to study in part 2 of your second PUC mathematics. So that is integrals, application of integrals, differential equation, vector algebra, three-dimensional geometry, linear programming problems, and probability. So the total number of hours is 80. The total number of hours we are going to utilize for this is 80 hours, and the maximum marks allotted for this part B is 80 marks. So totally in part 1 we have 70 marks, whereas in part 2 80 marks. Totally the maximum marks is 150. In this 150 we are going to answer for 100 out of this 150 marks. Okay. Now let us come to the detail in part 1. For the book part 1, the number of teaching hours are 70, the marks allotted is 70, whereas in part 2 the number of teaching hours is 80 and the marks allotted is also 80. So totally 150 hours and 150 marks. So in this 150 you are going to get 100, that's it. Okay. So these are the weightage for volume 1 as well as volume 2. Now let us come to the question paper pattern. Let me discuss the question paper pattern. I think you might have been familiar with the question paper pattern. So in the question paper we have 5 parts. So 5 parts, that is part A, B, C, D and A. So part A is very short answer questions, whereas part E is a essay type question. So remaining part B, part C, part D are so short answers as well as the essay type questions we are going to get. Now, so there are 4 parts, 5 parts A, B, C and D. So the maximum marks is 100 and the total time is 3 hours 15 minutes. So 15 minutes is given to read the question paper and the 3 marks is allotted to answer all the questions. Now, so in part A, let me discuss. In part A, as usual, you know there are 1 mark questions, 10 1 mark questions in part A. Part B, all 2 mark questions. So you have to answer for 2 marks. And in part C contains 3 mark questions. Part D contains 5 marks, whereas part E contains 10 marks. Here this 10 marks is divided into 2 sub questions like A and B. So A will carry 6 marks, B will carry 10 marks. Totally this is equal to 10 marks, 6 plus 4. Essay type question. So will be in part E. So part A 1 mark, part B 2 markers, part 3 3 mark, part D 5 marks questions, part E contains 1 6 marks as well as 1 4 mark questions. Now let us come to the detail. So in part A, the number of questions given and the number of questions we are going to answer. In part A, 10 questions are given. So you are going to answer for all the 10 questions. That means there is no choice in part A. That means for very short answer questions there is no choice. So in order to get 100 out of 100 marks, you should be familiar with answering all very short answer questions. That is, you should be very confident for answering 1 mark question. So in 1 mark questions there is no choice. So therefore you have to answer all the 10 questions out of 10 questions. So for 1 marks, 1 into 10 is 10. Whereas in part B we have 2 mark questions. So there are 14 questions. In this 14 questions we are going to answer for 10 marks. So you are going to answer 10 questions out of 14 questions. 4 choice questions are there. for part B, that is 2 marker questions. So totally it will carries 20 marks. Now whereas in part C also there are 14 questions. In that 14 questions you are going to answer for 10. So each question carries 3 marks. So part C contains each question 3 marks. 10 into 3 is equal to 30 marks. Whereas in part D, there are how many questions? 10 questions. In 10 questions you are going to answer for 6 questions. Each question carries 5 marks. That is essay type questions, derivations, all those comes in 5 marks question. So you are going to answer for 6 questions. Each carries 5 marks. 6 5s are 30 marks from part D. And the last part is part E. In part E we have 2 questions. So one question followed by 2 sub questions, like for example, if it is question number 50, you will get A and B. For A it is 6, for B it is 4. 6 plus 4 is 10. You are going to answer for 1 question out of 2 questions. So there are 2 questions, in that we are going to answer only 1 question, one 6 marks and one 4 marks. Totally the marks for part E is 10. So in general, in total, part A contains 10 marks, part B 20, part 3 contains part C 30 marks, part D 30 marks, part E 10 marks, totally 100 marks. So 100 marks from part A, part B, part C, part D and part E. Okay, this is how the number of questions as well as the marks allotted and the maximum number of questions they are going to ask. Okay, now let us come to the detailed blueprint of this simple blueprint for this question paper pattern. Now, for the first chapter, relations and functions, the total number of hours are 11 hours, and you will get one 1 mark question, one 2 marks, one 3 marks, one 5 marks question. Totally 11 marks for chapter 1, that is relations and function, all type of questions. 1 mark, 2 marks, 3 marks, 5 marks, no 6 as well as 4 marks, you will get 11 marks. Now let us come to the second chapter. The second important chapter is the inverse trigonometric function. The maximum hour is 8 and the maximum mark is also 8. So in inverse trigonometric function you will have only 1 mark, 2 mark and 3 marks questions. No 4 marks, 5 marks and 6 marks. So you will get one 1 mark question and a 2 marks question and one 3 marks question. So 3 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1, that is totally 8 marks. Okay, whereas the next chapter is the matrices. For matrices, the maximum marks you are going to get is 9 marks in matrices. In this, you will have one 1 mark question, no 2 marker, one 3 marks and one 5 marks question. So 5 plus 3 plus 1, that is nothing but 9 marks you are going to get for matrices. Similarly, for next chapter, determinant, the number of teaching hours is 13 hours. You will have one 1 mark question, one 2 marks question, no 3 marks question, one 5 marks question and one 4 marks question. So totally you will get 12 marks from determinant. So one 4 mark question will be there from determinant and one 5 marks question, one 2 marks question and one 1 mark question. So you will get 12 marks for the chapter determinants. Now whereas for continuity and differentiability, so you will have for continuity as differentiability 1 mark 2 questions and 2 marks 2 questions, 3 marks 2 questions, one 5 marker and one 4 mark questions. Totally you will get 20 marks from this continuity and differentiability. Now whereas the application of derivatives 11 hours, so there is no 1 mark questions, only one 2 mark question and one 3 mark question and one 5 marks question from application of derivative. The total mark is 10. Now let us come to the next important chapter is the integral calculus. In integrals, the number of teaching hours are 21. You will get one 1 mark question and two 2 marks question and two 3 marks question, one 5 marks question and one 6 marks question from this integral calculus, that is the properties of integrals. Now whereas if you come to the application of integrals, the maximum number of hours, so there is no 1 mark under 2 marks, you will get one 3 marks and one 5 marks question. So totally 8 marks for application of integrals. And whereas if we come to the next chapter, that is the differential equations. In differential equations also, the maximum number of hours are 9 hours. We don't have any 1 mark questions, so only 2 marks, 3 marks and 5 mark questions. So one 2 marks question, one 3 marks and one 5 marks question. So the marks maximum is 10 marks for differential equations. Now if you come to the next chapter, vector algebra. So in vector algebra there is no 4 marks, 5 marks and 6 marks questions, just like inverse trigonometry functions. Here only 1 mark, 2 marks and a 3 mark question. So in vector algebra you will get 1 mark question, 2 marks questions and 2 3 marks questions. So totally 11 marks from this chapter, vector algebra. And the next is analytical geometry 3D. In 3D you will get 1 mark question, 2 marks, 3 marks and 5 marks. One mark question, 1 2 marks, 1 3 marks and 5 marks, no 4 and 6 marks. Totally this will also carries 11 marks. Now, and the number of hours we are going to use for this is 12 hours. And the next one is the linear programming. For linear programming, the maximum number of hours is 7 and the maximum marks is also 7. You will get one essay type question for 6 marks and one object, that is a definition for 1 marks. There are few definitions. In that you will get one definition and one 6 marks question for part E from this linear programming problem. And if you come to the last chapter, that is probability. In probability we will get 1 mark 1 question, 2 mark 1 question, 3 marks 1 question and 1 5 marks question. Totally the marks for this is also 11 marks. So the question paper will be set for 150 marks and the number of hours is 150. The maximum number of marks will be 150 and in that we are going to answer for 100. So totally 1 mark 10 questions will be there and 2 marks 14 questions will be there. In that you are going to answer for 10 and similarly 3 marks 14 questions. In that also you are going to answer for 10 and 5 marker questions are 10. In that you are going to answer only 6 questions, whereas in part E 2 6 marks questions will be there. You are going to answer for 1 question and in part E 4 marker questions will be 2. You are going to answer for 1 question. So here all 10 questions, here 10 out of 14, here 10 out of 14, here 6 out of 10, here 1 out of 2, here also 1 out of 2. So this is what you are going to answer. Okay. So this is the sample blueprint for the question paper pattern for this academic year. Okay. So that's all regarding this question paper pattern. Is hope you followed. So from part 1 and part 2 you will have in part 1 70 marks, whereas in part 2 it is 80 marks. So totally together 150. In that 150 you are going to answer for 100 marks. So this is how the marks are distributed for each chapter. So that's regarding today's session, that is regarding the syllabus, detailed syllabus and the textbooks references and the question paper pattern. That's all regarding today's session. Now let us meet with the different concept. In the sense, let us start with the first chapter in the next session. Thank you very much.